Cank.
Render.
Well, hello.
Put them on the grid.
What do you say? On screen. Welcome, everybody, back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite pandemic podcast. Brought to you every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST on the inner tubes, on your video scope. Hope everybody's well. And we have a lot to get through tonight. I'm very excited. Before we do the intros, I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, our ever-loving sponsors. You see the John up there, for all of you people who know that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Philadelphian. You got to represent the John above my head. Our good buddies at Graphicsly create Clip Studio Paint. Yes, that Clip Studio Paint. Yes, the one almost every cartoonist and his mother is using in 2021.
The moms use it. All the moms. Cartooning moms, like, Junior, put away your Clip Studio. Don't leave it out.
Oh, Mom, I was just about to do some 3D rendering. And also our good buddy, John Morrow, who is the publisher at Two Morrows Publishing, who is our publisher in good standing of Mike's fine magazine, Draw, with an exclamation point. Mike, what's going on at Draw? What's new over there?
Nothing.
I mean,
Nothing.
I didn't mean to happen at Tomorrow.
Nothing.
I know that we were trying to get rid of all the print magazines. How's that going?
I'm not quite sure now. I know John was having a sale the last couple of months, so we were actually down to the last physical copies, especially of the early issues. I mean, some are already gone.
Yeah.
But, of course, they're always available for digital download, and I believe John has, as always, he has lots of bargains to where if you want to buy, I think he has you can get a bundle, you can get them all.
Yeah.
That's for like all of his publications. So, for some people, young people, young students, maybe you don't want to have a big carton of comics you got to lug around. So
yeah,
they can read the information on as a PDF. So.
And one thing we could always talk about is kind of the new burst of how young people, young meaning not our age, disseminate information. Right, while we're totally in the tactile, I need to open it, I need to touch it, I need it on my shelf with the spine. And I do know a lot of young people who are like, what do I need that stuff for? It's on my phone. Have you ever tried to give a young person some information and they won't take it, but they'll take a picture of it with their phone? Here, write this number down. Here, ching.
Well, I think for things like that, yeah, I mean, it's probably better to send them a text or something rather than them write it down. Although I can still remember my old phone numbers from when I was a kid because you'd have to write it down. I remember 935-5508 was my old phone number in Detroit. Now, I haven't used that phone number since 1975, but I can still remember it because there was a certain process that happened where you committed things to memory, not only by looking at it and memorizing, but you writing it down and memorizing it. And that relates to drawing because how we learn as artists is not just through, I'm going to read this comic. Right? I can read this little comic and I can look at all this art in here. How I learned was drawing and redrawing and redrawing. So, yeah. But yeah, a lot of young people prefer not to have floppies, as they call them. I can understand that to a degree.
And speaking of floppies, Mike, our good buddy Notorious JRD says, "What are you reading tonight, Mike? What's in your hands?"
I'm reading I used to love these old digests that they used to make.
He loves the digest,
right? And now this one's great because it has Wrightson, Kaluta, Arthur Soydam, Ellen Weiss, Ralph Reese, Wally Wood.
That's a
Orlando and
row.
Dick Giordano. Yeah, so it was basically a reprint digest of stuff that was like in House of Secrets or House of Mysteries or something called Ghost. And then they would make these, and they would put these in the like where you would get TV Guide back in the old days,
Yeah.
right by the cash register.
Yeah.
So I used to always love to get these things because sometimes you would see something that you were like, oh, I had never seen this story by, Neil Adams, or I'd never seen that issue with Wally Wood. So yeah, I love that. And then when I was a kid, we would go to Canada, and they had digests in Canada that were like Where Eagles Dare and all these British, the same size as this, and they were all war stories, which we didn't get in the States, but whenever we would go over the Ambassador Bridge to Windsor, and I loved seeing that was like exotic comics, and it turned out years later when I met my buddy Ricardo Villagran, he used to do comics for them. I think it was Fleetway or somebody used to do it.
Oh wow!
One of the British companies. So yeah,
that's super cool. I'm going to take this off the screen so our names come back because I didn't introduce ourselves. Thanks, guys, for joining us tonight. You're watching Pencil to Pencil, a weekly live podcast where us two blokes, Mike Manley over there, the Master Chief of Comic Books. Hello, Governor. And myself, Jamar Nicholas, Philadelphia's own. And here's a new one, Mike. You ready? Kevin Scrapple, because bacon was taken. You like that? We'll have to ask Dave Cooper if he's ever had Scrapple. We'll have to ask him about that.
They must have a Canadian version of Scrapple. Yeah, I mean, that seems like that's like, it's basically like a hot dog, but with sausage, spice. Because it's like whatever wasn't made into the hamburger and everything else is boiled and turned into Scrapple.
That's right. So on that nice note,
nitrates.
Let's start talking about our guests. So tonight, you guys are in for a treat. For the past, I'll say since the podcast started, Mike, every one of our guests is quality. Every one of our guests is diamond status, top tier creative talent. And we're happy to announce that tonight our guest is cartoonist, artist, painter, director, animator Dave Cooper. I've been a big fan of Dave's for a long time. One of my favorite things, we talked about this in the green room, was when Dave did his coloring guides in an old issue of Draw magazine.
Right, yeah, way back in the day.
It was fantastic. And that's another reason for you guys to go out and cop all of the Draw magazines. You need all the draws. You see what I just did there? So we're going to have a fantastic talk. If you've never joined us before, what happens is while we're live, you can be part of the show. So feel free to type into the chat or in the comments if you're on Facebook. And if your question meets kind of our conversation, I'll put it on the screen and Dave will answer it for you. All right?
I believe Dave is the third Canadian artist we have interviewed.
Oh wow, I love it. I love the odds. All right, so guys, let's render Dave Cooper. Let's bring him in. Woohoo!
Oh.
Look at that. Hey Dave, how are you?
Gentlemen. So good to be here.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming on, Dave. Behind the scenes, I've been chasing Dave for a while, and it's always fantastic to talk to you, Dave. And as all of us are, we understand what busyness looks and feels like, So we're really excited that you're able to make it onto the show. So
yeah,
appreciate that.
I'm stoked to be here. It's taken a while, but here we are.
Is that a painting on your easel or on your wall?
Yeah, that's a painting I've been working on for I think over a year. Like at this point I'm working on paintings for a show that will eventually happen in Paris. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be in 2020, I think. Mm-hmm. And now we're thinking maybe 22, 23. But anyway, so I've probably amassed about 30 paintings, small and large, like little ones, big ones. But they're just like coming along at a snail's pace because I'm doing like other work. Like my main thing right now is doing viz dev and the film industry.
Oh wow.
So
Now,
I
is that
just do
something?
this on weekends and like a little, an hour at the end of the day or something like that.
Right,
So it
yeah.
takes that painting is taking forever. It's driving me completely insane.
No, the VizDesk stuff, is that NDA stuff, or can you talk a little bit of what you're doing? Are you doing like
Um,
backgrounds or
yeah,
like what you did on Futurama?
it's sort of like overall conceptual stuff. Like when the pandemic began, I thought it would be good to like have some steady work, so I started accepting that kind of work. I'd taken like probably 2 or 3 years away from animation after doing my own series for a while. I felt like
Yeah.
I needed to just do my own thing. But then having gotten back into it, I found like I actually really enjoyed it. Especially the biz dev. It's an area that I've never really gotten into heavily and always sort of fantasized about, and it turns out to be a ton of fun. Like just talking to the directors and the writers and the producers and sort of like brainstorming visual like manifestations of what they want to do, and just kind of back and forth. And so I'm doing like characters and big environments and all kinds of stuff.
So Dave, are you going in-house at all, or is it all remote?
No in-house. No. Even down there, the people that live, like I'm up here in Canada, but even down in California, everybody's working remotely. So it's just like one big 40-person conference call whenever we have to have a big meeting.
So it's like all these little heads. Like, can you see everybody? Like,
and you have to like search for who's talking because the square turns green.
Right. And do you find that in that environment, I'm sure it's difficult in its own way to, I don't know, maybe get things done when you're not, in the same space with somebody. Do you find that maybe it's a little easier to kind of, I don't know, get an overview of the whole team when everybody's in one space?
Yeah, I think so. And it's also just like being just in charge of like a sort of small area of the visual department is kind of relaxing. Like I just dig being a kind of a small part of things right now. Yeah, it's just like I just have one job, and like I can just completely focus on it, and I can have like a life when the workday's over and stuff like that.
which I guess is not how it was when you were trying to do your show, right?
Yeah, it could get pretty crazy. Like like you've done tons of work in animation, right? So
Yeah,
you know how the production kind of ramps up. So it starts out pretty chill, and it gets more and more busy and busier and busier. And at the peak, you're just like just barely surviving. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, were you doing that from Canada, or did you go to LA to do that?
That was I was going back and forth. So I lived here. Like when I signed the deal, I told them that I didn't really want to be away from my kids because they were young at the time, and they were like, yeah, that's cool. We can work around that, and you can come visit the production every month or two or whatever it was. So I did that, and it was so fun in the beginning. Like, yay, I get to fly down to LA, and and by the end of like 4 years of production, I'm like, holy crap,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
enough flying.
So how long? Because we've talked to some other people, and I went through a development deal. How long was your from development and then the pitch to you actually working on it, and then from them going, okay, we want to make a pilot, and now we actually want to do series, because there's always a series of, it's like first stage, second stage, third stage.
I think like my memory's not the best, but I believe that they brought us in to do some development on this thing. Like they called me personally to like ask if I would pitch something, and basically we worked up a concept. I'm guessing in about like a year or so, they asked us to make like a little animated short rather than like continue to develop and develop and develop it. They were like, let's just see what this thing looks and feels like. So we made like a 2 or 3 minute short, I think. and but then we continued developing for like 3 years. Like I think the whole development thing was 4 years or something. So by the time, I would say like 3 months before it got picked up, we were basically thinking to ourselves, I've had it. Like, this is enough. They're just like, it's just so much back and forth and tweaking. And then they surprised us and picked it up. So I was like, okay, cool.
So that was what, banana?
Big
Banana-
banana cricket.
Banana cricket, I almost forgot.
Say that 5 times fast, right?
It started as banana, pig goat banana robot, and then it was pig goat banana mantis, and then it ended up being cricket.
Dave, we're jumping all over the place. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to light? Because I know that you and Johnny Ryan, who you collaborated with on that had kind of been going around for a couple of years, right?
I mean, we worked on a bunch of little short comics together, like in Nick Magazine. But when Nickelodeon TV, like when the development producer called me and asked if I wanted to pitch something, they're like, you need a writer, and they sort of pitched a bunch of professional, like seasoned TV writers to me, and I just couldn't like get my head around the idea of using somebody sort of like conventional, I guess. So
Right.
I was like, what about using Johnny Ryan? And they were like, I don't know. But Audrey was a fan of Johnny's, so she could sort of see like the logic in it, I guess. But it took some pushing, and finally they were okay with it. And that's when we started, like, that's when things, started to really take shape.
Was there a period before they started talking about attaching a writer to it? Were you going to do that heavy lifting?
No,
you never.
I've never wanted to write television. Like, I really struggle to write my own stuff, and it never feels like I really know what I'm doing. It's like, it's like my painting as well. It's almost like every time I start a painting or a script, it's like I'm doing it for the first time. I don't really remember any of the technique or like how to do things. I just have to sort of push through.
Yeah.
But in television, like, you have to deliver, so there's no way I was going to put myself in that position. And, when I do if I do other television stuff, I would definitely get, writers on board to.
Well, it's such a huge amount of work that no one who doesn't do it really understands the amount of work required and the amount of collaboration. And then it's like, it's a train, so everything has to hit these dates. Yeah. And if this thing hiccups, then this other thing hiccups, and this other thing hiccups, and then all of a sudden you don't have enough time to get things done.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You look at those production schedules, and it's just like,
there's no fat.
Yeah, it's like, you're right. It's like everything is just jammed together, and you mess up. Like, you want to be only dealing with real pros. But my thing is, I want the real pros to have something unique about them. I don't want it to just be a cookie cutter kind of production.
Well, that's the odd thing that I learned my first time pitching stuff, is that everybody says, in Hollywood, they go, we want something unique. We want something fresh. We want something new. And then you give them something that's fresh and new and unique, and they go like, what is this?
Right.
But then if you describe your new, unique, fresh idea as Star Wars meets SpongeBob, then they go, I know Star Wars. I know SpongeBob. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's like all the popular shows, a lot of the popular shows were completely out of left field at the time. But then it's like the higher ups never learn that lesson, and they never want to really have that foresight. They still want to be like, oh, give me that last thing that was a big surprise.
Right. Yeah. And you have to, as you talked about, the thing that I learned too was that you have to hold your interest in something over
Yeah.
something that's insecure as far as what's going to happen, but for a long time. Because
Right.
it's not like, well, if you do a comic, a couple months most, right, and then you're done and you can go on. But like working in film, it's and then it's like weeks between, like, you get a letter from somebody in the beginning. It takes a
Yeah, I
while.
mean, it takes a whole other sort of like the personality required to be okay with all that is like a big part of what's necessary. I think like you can have the skill and you can be hardworking and professional, but then you also have to have that like really long-sighted kind of way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the best at that. Like I was so lucky with Underground Comics where I would just call Gary, at Fantagraphics and be like, I really want to do this thing, and he'd be like, okay, go ahead and do it.
Right.
And I would do it, and then they would publish it, and then it's like the polar opposite of how television is made.
So, in your ideal artistic world, would you prefer to be doing just painting or just painting in comics, or would you still like to do animation? Because it really is like they're very different animals and they require a lot of different energy in different areas.
Totally. Like my dream scenario is just having everything going at once. Like I just like all the plates spinning. But the only problem with that is that each one of the things that I'm into actually deserves all my attention. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I just painted 24 hours a day, that would be, that would get the best work out of me in the long run, and I would become the best painter I could be. But I have this interest in like everything. I want to do everything. I like music. I like animation. Like the thing about animation for me is that it's so thrilling. Like a lot of my other pursuits are very sort of solitary,
Yes.
slow. They're internal, and then animation kind of pulls something else out of me that's like, I don't know, like the just seeing your work move
Yeah.
and making sound and just the idea that so many people see it is exciting too. It's just a totally different pursuit for me.
Do you remember when your show premiered or you saw your first, run of the animatic and you were getting other people's response to something that you worked on? Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I do for sure. It was the pilot episode of Big Goat, and it took me by surprise. Like when it played, and it, I just had like this rush, like pure euphoria. And I just looked over at Johnny, and it looked like he was experiencing the same thing. We just kind of like shared a glance, and I was like, "Whoa, that's a
Yeah.
lot." Because the thing about television is there's so many people helping. Like it's mind-boggling how many people are working like full-time jobs just to like get your ideas on the TV.
One thing that I one
Sometimes.
one thing that I really enjoyed about Pig Goat is that how spectacularly on model to your style it
Yeah.
all looked. That
That's,
would almost make you think that you sat down and drew it all. You know
huh.
what I mean? Um,
Yeah, like I'm still not objective, even like 4 or 5 years later. But I guess like I suffer from remembering like the worst drawing or the worst this or the worst that.
yeah.
So that's nice to hear.
So maybe this would be a good point for our viewers to uh, take a trip into the time machine for your origin story, Dave. If you'd like to entertain us with that, kind of like your beginnings, getting into comics, and then any stops along the way that you'd like to share.
Well, I mean, I started out like the first big deal for me was when I was probably about 5 or 6, living in Nova Scotia. My dad was the town doctor, and this famous children's book illustrator moved to Nova Scotia from New York City. He'd been kind of shunned there. Tommy Ungerer.
Hmm.
There's a film about his life around that time. I forget the name of it right now, but anyway, So he would come over to the house sometimes and sketch, and I would just get to watch this amazing artist draw. And he would give my parents copies of his books with like beautiful drawing, like personalized to them and with beautiful full color drawings. He actually made me like a tomahawk, like a faux tomahawk made out of a stone and a twig, like a stick, feathers, and I think that was kind of when I think that was the moment that I knew I was going to be an artist. Just the idea that I could, like, just seeing somebody who actually has done it. Like I think a lot of people who don't pursue their dreams like I have just didn't have exposure to like someone else who had done it, so it just seemed maybe abstract to them.
Yeah.
So it was planted, the seed was planted pretty early. Then we moved to, I was like sketching all the time when I was little. My parents would always give me sketchbooks and I just fill them up. The next big thing was probably when I was in my early teens and I met this Barry Blair guy who used to do Aircell comics back in whenever that was, 80s. So I did comics for him. He was like a sort of a mentor to me, I guess. Bit of a predator as well. So like very mixed feelings about that whole time.
Yeah.
I guess like when Aircell fell apart, I basically just started drawing and like submitting to companies, and like I had basically no idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. I just had this idea in my head that I should be a comic book artist,
Dave, before you go further down that road, I'd love to stop for a second and just talk about like what was your impetus to start doing sequential work. Like
it was Barry. Like he met me when I was I want to say 11 years old. And he was doing the first self-published Elf Lord comics, like with a print run of 300 or something like that. And he wanted a background, like a backup story, I think. So that's why I did comics. I was like, okay, I got to do it, and I was so friggin' excited about it.
So you were like 11 drawing your own backup story?
Yeah. It was called Kingdom of the Warlords.
That's incredible.
And it's like hilarious to look at. But I tried my best, and I had tons of hatching, and it was all I worked really hard on it.
Now, were you reading comics then? I mean, we were reading comic strips.
Yeah, but not seriously. Like I wasn't a big comic book fan or anything like that. I think that I honestly don't remember, Mike. It's weird. Like I had some comics, but I didn't go to the comic shop regularly. I didn't have like an allowance to buy that kind of thing. I didn't have friends who were comic book fans. But I had kids' books, and what few comics I did have, I probably obsessed over. I remember Alfredo Alcala, maybe like some kind of really hatchy drawing style that I just kind of obsessed over.
And what about newspaper strips? Anything there?
Yeah. I used to. I mean, there were so few that were really worth reading, but I would study them all, and like, of course, I loved Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side, but maybe I liked looking at Hagar, but didn't really speak to me.
Right.
But I mean, I'd love getting that page and just being able to get down on the ground with it and just spend some time with it.
One thing that always appealed to me about the strips, especially when I was too young to know what I was looking at, is like I had some really weird likes. Like I was a big Doonesbury fan. I love Gary Trudeau. Yeah. I didn't know what the hell I was reading, but there's something about it. And you mentioned Hagar, and like just kind of like a lot of the texturing on the clothes and stuff was really different from what I was seeing other places, and that kind of imprinted on me. I wondered if you took some of those things.
I think that's probably why I just mentioned it. Like I haven't Hagar's since then, but
Right.
like there was something about that nice chunky hatch, you know. It's always spoken to me.
Yeah.
Any really well done expressive hatch feels good to me.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. So go
That's
ahead.
all right.
You're talking about aerosol and
Yeah, so I mean, I just basically floundered for probably a decade, submitting, you know, doing like short stories for like Dark Horse Presents or Pictopia at Fantagraphics, just pushing and pushing and pushing, you know, trying my darndest to get in there, and finally, I think I like what I consider to be the beginning of my real career was when Fantagraphics published Suckle.
Mhm.
I felt like that was kind of like a big jump for me. I felt like I kind of exploded, you know.
Yeah.
It felt amazing to make that book and just to come up with all that stuff that I had in me. I didn't realize I had in me, you know. I think it was the confidence that Gary had in me that you know kind of led to all that.
So were you working back and forth with him in
No,
submitting samples, and he would give you feedback, or you just sent it in
No,
and he goes like, "Hey, this is pretty cool."
Yeah, that's the thing with the stuff that I did with Fantagraphics that was maybe kind of unusual, is that I would get the okay to do the book, and then I would just do the whole thing, like from beginning to end, and then I'd mail it to them, and then it would be like, you know, they'd send it to the printer. There was nothing. It
Well,
was
no editorial, nothing.
nothing.
Wow.
I mean, I think that was maybe Gary's strategy, you know, like no editing was his editing on that stuff.
Because that was going to be my next question, is where you kind of like going through stages, like showing thumbs and stuff, where you basically just did the whole book.
No, I didn't even know that that's what people did. I didn't even know what editing meant, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know that editing was, you know, talking to people and you know, like working out how things are going and improving stuff. It's just like I just did my thing.
So to jump ahead a little bit, and then I want to jump back if it's okay. Were there points in your later career where now you have editorial or you have notes and things like that, and how did you react to that after being, you know, doing your own thing? So
it's a big learning process.
Yeah.
Especially in television. I mean, I think I you know, I think I did okay with like evolving and being okay with all that, but it took some thinking. You know, it's like in television there's so many people who have so many disparate concerns and, like, you know, agendas, and I kind of got into it for a lot of especially the early period of Pig Goat. I was like, wow, this is really kind of cool to have like so many people offering ideas, and, you know, you can take the good ones, and you know, if you don't like them, you can let them go, and in general, I felt like it improved things overall. You know, there would be times where something would get changed and changed and changed, and every time I'd think like, why are we doing this? Why are we changing? And then at the end, it would often be like way better than what we started with. So it kind of won me over to that whole way of working.
That's, you know, what's exciting about that is I think there's an idea that most creatives of your stripe are maybe divas in a way. Like, well, whatever Dave says, that's what Dave is going to expect. But it sounds like you like the collaborative process.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when in Rome, you know, like
Right.
I wasn't gonna be like, I'm not doing it your way, even though you're paying me all this money, and I just wanted to have an open mind and like not poo-poo stuff just out of hand, you know. And like 90% of the time, it was all well-meaning or more smarter than what I thought of or whatever it was, you know.
And it's sort of the nature of the beast is that these people are investing literally probably hundreds of thousands of dollars minimum.
Millions,
start out in
millions.
Yeah, well, if you're making a series, but even just to make your pilot,
right,
there's a lot of money, and then they're going like, they want to be able to say, I want to make sure it tastes like strawberry.
Right. And to be fair, they weren't being dicks about it. They weren't like
Right,
sort of
right.
like flexing and like you have to do this.
Right.
It really felt like they wanted to help make the thing better, you know. So I dug that.
So, and I know that some of my favorite things of yours is uh, probably the Weasel series and Ripple, and I think I've collected that like 1,000 different ways. Every time it comes out in a different way, I'll get it. But
Twice, Jamar, twice.
really, I feel like
Yes.
I have like
Well, there was Weasel, like
right.
a 5-issue series, and then there was the first collection of Ripple, and then there was the new one because I wanted to improve it.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think you call because it's one of those things that I think I had let people borrow, and then you buy it twice, and like we talked about that at one point. Like how
The
many?
binding on that first one was so poor. Like if you lent it to too many people, it was going to come back in 2 parts.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of get into some of your more personal work, I'd love to talk about your color theory. Because one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode was that you did was it maybe more than one, Mike? How many?
No, it's only one. It was one.
One
Yeah.
kind of like color tutorial. You
Which,
did
of
in
course,
Pro Magazine.
now that the technology is like, the way of coloring can still work, but the technology is like that was Photoshop
3 maybe
001. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So could you maybe talk about how you arrived to your palette, or how your color theory kind of develop itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was saying earlier. I never have like an outcome in mind.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating to me in one sense, but in another sense, it's like I always feel like I'm exploring, which is exciting to me.
Yeah.
So like with my paintings, I just basically cover the whole thing in brown garbage, and then I just start sort of like choosing like areas where I think something needs to happen. Like this area should be darker, this area should be bluer, this one should be lighter, and I just start sort of working like all over the whole painting, and make tons of mistakes. Like, I choose colors that don't work, and then that tells me, that brown doesn't work, then it should be light blue or whatever.
Right.
And it just goes on forever. Like it's super frustrating. I never seem to reach a point of having like an established approach that I can just fall back on.
Well, some painters are like that. Some painters like that. They like that the search and destroy and you discover things. It's and other people do like a tight little comp, and then they just take that and I
mean, I envy people like that. I part of me wishes like I was like that, because it would save so much time and heartache. Like sometimes I'll look at my previous work in like a book or something, and it just looks like I knew what I was doing. But then I know like, oh, that plant took like 10 iterations, and it was driving me crazy, and it was like it's a ton of work. What can I say? But you were talking more about digital, I think. And
well, I mean, I feel like it all kind of one hand informs the other in that sense.
Yeah, I was going to say it's basically the same kind of thing, where I'm just like, it's just trial and error over and over and over and over and over and over.
So, and with a lot of that early work, and even like with when you started doing a more color work, a lot of your stuff seemed very, I guess I'll say, ethereal. You had like a lot of very kind of like transparent, ghostly colors. And I just kind of wonder where that was coming from in a way. Like
it's interesting. I think that kind of began. It was sort of linked with like a really blue period that I went through, kind of a depressive time, a few years actually. And when I look back on work, I can tell like which ones I did during that time. And it's strange because it's it's almost like the people and the objects are sort of hollow, like they're disappearing or something.
Mm.
And it's pretty, and I like it, but it's amazing to me that it was possibly like kind of an expression of what I was what was happening with me. And when I came out of that, my work became much more sort of like chunky and aggressive and a little bit more opaque.
So you think psychologically, the way you were painting, if you felt insecure or tentative, it's like you were almost, that's how you were.
Yeah. I was painting with very thin, transparent paint, almost like how you would paint with watercolor, but it was oil. So I would do that for a whole day, and the next day it would be dry, and I would continue doing it. So it just like becomes so sort of luminous, like because of all those layers of color.
Yeah.
Like, it really showed through. It was pretty cool.
Well, that's how Maxfield Parrish painted. He painted in the glazes,
right,
over and over, like pure color, and then he'd put a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's why you have the light go through.
Yep.
And come back out, which might relate to your color sense in coloring digitally, because digital, the light is coming at us. When you're looking at a print, the light is not coming from.
Yeah. The trick is to try to get that printed work to feel luminous as well. Like I try to always keep some of that transparency happening in my work, and then it becomes just one part of my vocabulary, and I can have like opaque and transparent and sort of like play them off of each other.
So we're kind of jumping back and forth between the painting and your printed work and digital. Around the period where you were doing a lot of printed matter, technology wasn't where it is now, right? So did you go through a lot of headaches and heartaches when you're trying to get things back from the printer that looked kind of like, you know what I'm saying? I would love if you talked about that.
I'll never forget the first strip that I had printed in color. It came back like 3 times darker than it should have been, and I was just like floored. I couldn't believe, like I didn't know, like your monitor is like I just didn't understand any of that stuff at that time.
Yeah.
So that was shocking, and I guess I tried to learn to avoid that.
Now the editor, the printer didn't go, "Hey kid, your colors are kind of fugitive."
Somebody might have, but like I was the type of guy who would be like, "No, that's the way I meant it." Like I just thought that they were maybe seeing, like I just figured they were seeing what I was seeing, and they were thinking that's too dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just too dumb or cocky or whatever.
Well, there's that whole thing of like screen calibration, which maybe you didn't know about in the beginning. I mean, because
sure didn't.
And even I remember in the 90s when I started printing my stuff, you would get a transparency, but the transparency was not necessarily accurate to what it would look like.
I know, that was just a confusing like middle step to be like completely throw you off.
Right.
Yeah, because you're looking at film on film, not on on paper. It's completely different.
Yeah, it's all crazy. Like I feel like now things are pretty simple. Maybe for me anyway. Like I've got my monitor calibrated properly. I work with people that I have a good sort of communication with, and so my last book came out perfect. I was just like, oh my god, this is exactly how I want it. So gratifying to have things actually work out.
Well, back in the late 90s, people were doing hand separations. Now everything's done by a machine. Nobody does, they're going to shoot the 4 different transparencies and all the stuff that used to be done in the old days. Now the computer, you send them the file, the computer does that.
Absolutely.
You
Which
know,
is how I like it. Like, I don't want to have any. I don't want to be a printmaker. You know, I just want to do my thing in my studio and then magically have the printed final product show up on my door.
which is crazy when you think about how guys like Richard Corbin would do his
Yeah.
work. He'd do it in gray tone,
Yeah.
grayscale, and then he would do all those overlays for each color, having it in his head what he thought it would look like when it was printed. That's why his work was like
And his
didn't
little work
look like any.
I no, definitely not. Do you guys know Ryan Heshka?
No.
I just did a thing on Instagram about him. You should go check it out.
Okay.
But he's doing a lot of that same kind of stuff. Doing like, I think he's got a 6 or 7 color separated risograph comic, and it's got that same magic to it, you know, because it's like there's the drawing, but then there's also the passion for the technique and, like, you know, the medium of printing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's that whole fine art aspect to a certain, I guess, what they used to call indie comics. I don't even know what you call it now, because there used to be like Fantagraphic was like indie, right?
Right.
Now I don't even know if you can call them that, you know, because these guys are like major publishers. They're publishing major artists. But there was that whole thing where you would go to like the convention in New York, and there would be people would be silk screening
Yes.
their comics and then sticking felt on it and things like that, which I thought was really awesome. Like that you could silk screen your own comic, you know, and maybe
I
only
love
make
that
it
stuff.
So was that informing your process at all, seeing other things like that as well?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was an inspiration to me, but I don't know that a lot of it ended up in my work. It just when people have that kind of passion for their product or their work or whatever, it just, you know, that kind of inspires me to just like push whatever I happen to have, you know. Like when I'm inspired by an artist or a book or whatever, it just makes me like think, how can I pull that level of passion out of myself, you know, make my work look that cool or that personal.
So who were you looking at when you were first starting to come out and do your own? What were the key people that would like, if you're flagging, you'd go look at that person's work and then you'd, you know.
Yeah. Well, definitely Crumb.
Right.
Von Bode. But you know, when I did Suckle, it was kind of a time when I just discovered everything at once. So there was like David Lynch and Alejandro Jodorowsky and Cronenberg and Dan Klaus and Jim Woodring, and it was all just at once. So I think I might have imitated some of the things that some guys were doing, but generally speaking, I think it just was an inspiration to me to like pull my own thing out, you know.
And
I would never do that in public, but
not in mixed company, right? And you know, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your world building, because you know, when you were doing like Suckle and things like that, the things that you were kind of pulling out were just kind of like, wow, okay, I'm invested in this. Where is this coming from? But also, you know, it seems like you've kind of developed. It's almost like, I hate to say a house style, but it's like you kind of know what you're going to get, you know, when you're illustrating a story. I wanted to ask where maybe some of the influences for your world building came from.
I mean, I love like Mobius is probably my, you know, by far my biggest inspiration. Like to this day, when I'm feeling blocked, you know, if I have to do some viz dev or think of my own stuff, I go and look at Mobius because it just kind of like turns on the knob for me, you know.
Yeah.
So Mobius and trying to think, like Yves Chaland, like French guys in general are pretty amazing for that stuff. they just seem to put so much care and love into, like, you know, environments and vehicles, and it makes it all feel so fully realized.
Well, I think that's just because the publishers also expected them to do that. It's like you didn't draw like here's going to be the splash page, and then the next panel I'm going to draw just like a window, and I because I was talking to somebody, I think it was Dan Panosian who had done something for them, and like American comics, you would kind of like you do a really intense scene, and then you kind of cheat stuff, even in the strips you do like, but no, they want like a background in every frame, right? They want
Absolutely.
you know.
You guys know the artist Ralph Mayer? He's a
I think so. Yeah.
Like you look at his pages, and it's just like, good Lord, every single page would represent about the time I would take on like 10 or 12 pages. It's like incredible craftsmanship. It's just so expressive and rich.
He's a guy that does Undertaker. Yeah.
Amazing work.
Yeah, and it's quite great on Instagram because he shows his actual process from like his thumbnails to his penciling, and you can see what he's thinking. And I think like
it's
I would have been it's so great to be able to see somebody's process. And I agree with you with Mobius is that I mean he's like to me there's two guys. There's like Kirby and Mobius. They're like sort of like polar opposites in some ways for me, but both so completely creative. It's like there's never really any bad Kirby and never really bad Mobius. It's just
I would add Crumb to that too. So I think some people think of that as like
And maybe speaking of that, Dave, I was going to ask another question about how you developed your mark making. That's my very art school phrase for tonight. Because it seems like a lot of your
pinky
line
out
work is
mark making.
A lot of like I feel like a lot of your line work is very kind of like you're like attacking the page in a way, kind of like almost like a staccato style of kind of hitting the page. I wonder, like, had you always been drawing that way? And then what's the difference in speed when you started inking, and how'd you develop your ink line? Or the coming from different places?
I mean, I think I've always wanted my line to have a distinct personality. So I haven't always approached it the same way, but certainly in the past like 10, 12, maybe even 20 years, like I have this sort of like scalloped, like broken line thing going on all the time. And to me, it makes things look more lively. I don't know what it is. Like I don't see it in other people's work, and their work looks amazing to me. So it's not like, but like for me personally, when I look at my own drawings, they just don't have any life until I do something like that to them. So like, I can draw like a beautiful, single line representing an arm or something, but it doesn't look right until I start sort of doing this kind of thing with like variation in line and thickness, and it gives it like for me it's kind of a billowy.
I was gonna say, and just kind of made me think of, not necessarily that your work is like this, but it reminds me of some of like the 50s and 60s kind of like cheesecake artists, and even like Ketchum. And I talked about this with Mike a while. Like there was this weird kind of inking thing where it almost looked like there were ridges in an ink line, and like R.C. Harvey and guys like that were doing this very kind of like very weird chunky.
Well, I remember really digging Peanuts comics when he was drawing kind of like shaky hand.
Right.
I think I was maybe imitating that a little bit at some point, but it sort of morphed into this crazy thing. Like after I finished production on Pig Goat, I had it in my mind like I'm going to do an Eddie Table book. I did this book called Mudbite, and I developed this style of inking that was it was like it was almost like a tattoo gun. Like my hand, I trained my hand to behave like a tattoo gun.
Huh. Uh-huh.
And I really liked the style. Like my hand would be doing this, but my fingers doing this at the same time, and it was like almost imperceptible, but it gave it like a bit of a sort of life, like
Uh-huh.
an activity. And so I went from like 4 years not doing that kind of thing, and then suddenly I spent 4 months doing that intensely every single day, and I completely damaged my hand. Like,
Really?
yeah, to this day, it's not behaving properly. It's like kind of
From like carpal tunnel kind of thing, you mean?
I don't know. I mean, maybe some of your viewers will have some advice. I've been to, like, I have a chiropractic practitioner who works on it monthly, and sometimes it feels like, oh, good, it's getting better, like it's going to be fixed, and then it's like, no, it's not really there. Like I would never go back to drawing that way again, because I know it would mess me up. But I'm still always sort of like trying to achieve something similar, but I'm like, I have to like sort of baby my finger now. It's kinda,
so almost like and I don't know what I'm talking about. So sort of like a repetitive stress injury, kind of like just from stabbing at the page, right? And how much of that has carried over into your brush work with when you're painting?
Yeah, I used to do the same thing with painting, and I'm kind of avoiding that now too. Like I would always be. It's almost like I've got. What's that?
Carpal tunnel?
No, like a neurological thing where you've got
like Parkinson's or something.
Yeah, Parkinson's.
Yeah,
It's almost like that kind of thing where it's like it happens involuntarily, and I have to tell myself, okay, stop doing that, and then I can sort of do a nice stroke, or I can choose to like go in and out, but there's always this thing that wants to happen. It's very weird. Wow. I was kind of worried about it.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about comics is that you're doing things in a much smaller area, but with your painting, some of your paintings are pretty big, so you're sort of moving your hand over here and your hand over there.
Very different. The little stuff, like in my early career, my pages were only about this big. I would just like put on my glasses and like try to like pretend I'm doing a miniature page or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a couple I bought. I bought from you years ago, and they were very small.
Like, it was a weird kind of challenge that I imposed on myself. I don't know why. Like I used to look at Ivan Brunetti's pages that were like this big, and it just
and you look at those old peanut strips. The peanut strips are big.
Yeah. They're a lot bigger than you expect them to be, right?
Lately, I just started doing these huge drawings, like I think by like 3 feet by 4 feet, and I'm just sort of experimenting with the idea of making a drawing like I would normally make, but just expanding it like this and using much bigger tools, and it's super fun. Like I've done a few. Did one for a group show coming up in Paris, and then a group show in Montreal coming up soon. And I'm definitely looking forward to doing more stuff like that.
So something like that, obviously you're not scanning, right? Oh, if you're doing it for your
somebody upstairs banging around.
Are you doing that for your gallery work? I had a weird question asking you about shooting your work, or
I'm so glad you asked, Jamar.
So
that huge drawing was I tried this new technique. I got my scanner here.
Okay.
Like 11 by 17.
Yeah.
And basically, I take it and I put it on a big table in the middle of the table, and then I take off the the lid or whatever, the cover, and I scan the drawing in sections.
Yeah.
So like this big drawing I've actually done it with some paintings too that required about 12 scans. And then Photoshop is like incredible at just stitching it all together.
Yeah, there's a couple of new options, right, that I've heard about. That there's some sort of sewing thing that it helps.
It's called the one I use is called Photo Merge.
Okay, and it kind of lines things up for you a little
And
bit better.
it's funny because I have spent so much money in the past decade or two hiring photographers to come to my house, set up, take hours. And then my buddy Mupan, I remember him mentioning somewhere online that he scans these. He makes huge drawings,
Hmm.
and he said that he scanned them himself at home. And I was like, really? I didn't think that was like I've heard of it, but I just imagined it was a fairy tale.
Right.
So I thought, well, okay, I guess I'll try it, and it worked like a charm. I was like,
Wow.
I just saved $150 with one
Yeah.
piece of effort.
I mean, it's really an unsung part of like catalog making and all that kind of stuff is getting really great photos of
Yeah.
paintings. It's a really hard process. So
Yeah, it took
I'm
me
glad you spoke
years.
about that. Yeah.
Like I went through so many photographers. Yeah, it sounds easy. Like, you set up the camera, there's a flat thing on the wall and just shoot it, but it's like the lighting is so important. It's got to be like you get glare so easily and stuff.
Yeah, and you want to catalog your work, especially if you're selling it, because later on you might want to do a book, or somebody
Yeah.
wants to include one of your paintings in a book.
Yeah, I've always been like super, super diligent about archiving everything. Like probably for like 20 or 30 years, I've scanned or photographed everything I've done.
Dave, can you talk a little bit, because I have a couple of your books over here. So when you started doing kind of these catalogs, I'll call them, was that something that you just kind of put onto your yearly schedule? You know what? I've done around 50 paintings. I think I need to make a book. Or was there
That
somebody
kind
in
of
your
thing. Yeah, like when I finished Weasel, you might notice that book is actually in fine print. It says Weasel somewhere, like Weasel number 6 or Weasel number 7.
Oh yeah, it's over here. Yeah.
We kind of did away with that idea after a while, but originally it was just me thinking, well, I'm not doing comics anymore, but I'm doing all these paintings for various, art shows, and why not just continue compiling stuff with Fantagraphics every once in a while? So every time I had like a couple of shows put together with some kind of cohesive theme, we just put out a book.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
we did 3 of them, right? And then
yeah,
yeah.
I think so. I have my stack over here. Yeah, and then Pillowy is the newest one.
Yeah, that's the really big one. That one was with Cernunnos Press in France.
This is a gorgeous book.
Oh, thanks for showing it.
Oh yeah, man.
You'll find it online.
Yeah, go cop that.
That's the book I was telling you about, where I was like fully 100% satisfied with all the printing. I was just bowled over. Like I couldn't believe it when it showed up. I was so happy.
Yeah, printing is improved so much in the last 10 years, and there's so many good books on painters, and
Yeah.
Like if you see a book on a older painter now, they have great reproduction where, like I have the Dean Cornwell book, and the reproduction on those books now is so much better than the one that I had to spend like $300 for in like
Totally,
1990.
I remember the art books my parents had. Like I think even as a kid, I could tell they weren't right. They just were like kind of dull, and I don't know. There's something lifeless about the photographs.
Yeah, and the paper was usually not always the best, so it'd be kind of dull.
Yeah, that's probably the root of the problem right there.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your journey from drawing your self-published comics into painting, and how you learned to paint? What was your process or your interest in painting? Or did you always have an interest in painting?
I had always wanted to paint, and I would sort of say jokingly, I'm going to be a painter one day, and my wife would be like, yeah, you can do it, Dave. And I wasn't sure it would ever really happen. And then one day I was just like, fuck it. I'm not gonna stop just because I haven't gone to art school. I haven't learned the technique. I'm just gonna take the canvas and the paint and start slopping stuff around and see what happens, And it just went like the first painting I ever made on with oil was so satisfying, and I'm to this day I'm somewhat proud of it. It's not the greatest painting in the world, but at least it shows my determination. It was very kind of aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Were you reading anything on like the technical part of because painting with oil paint, you can do stuff like very like watercolor or
Yeah.
something that looks like you're putting peanut butter on a sandwich.
There was a really great art store in Ottawa called Art Guys, and the two guys there, Jason and Brandon, were almost like mentors to me in a way. Like I would go in and just talk to them, and they had so much knowledge about fine art and oil painting. I think I learned probably most of what I knew from them, and then everything else is always with me. It's always trial and error. Like I just have to get in there, and I kind of like willfully ignore advice, and like I just have to do it myself. So that's kind of what I did with oil painting.
And did you just kind of come to a natural, I guess, size for your canvas? Like, were you starting off small and then just maybe pressing yourself to see how much bigger you could go?
Well, part of what I wanted to do with Weasel was have an outlet for all these different interests that I had. Like, so I had Ripple, which was like a hatchy, realistic story. I had Eddie, which was kind of like more conventional cartooning, but in a like weird, dreamy sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always wanted the paintings to be an outlet for the covers to be an outlet for my paintings. So all the early paintings that I did to the dimensions of Weasel, but much, much bigger, and I always liked the idea of doing big oil paintings. So in the beginning, I think they were probably 2 by 3 feet or something like that. And I always pushed the size, like my whole career. I've always wanted to make them as big as I can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And did you, when you first started working big, did you kind of, no pun intended, paint yourself into a corner? Like after you were done with these, like just like shit, how am I going to pack these or roll them up to send to patrons? And
yeah, that's a whole other like learning curve. Like paintings on stretchers are kind of cumbersome and annoying, and shipping them is a pain in the ass. So I think after expensive, yeah. I think after maybe my first 10 years, I started thinking more smart, and I started painting directly onto unstretched canvas. Like that one behind me is unstretched, and it's just hanging on a mechanism that just like hangs it on the wall for me.
Yeah.
And if I get sick of looking at it, I can just roll it up and put it in the closet and forget about it. And then when I take it out, it's like I have the objectivity of time, and I can see exactly what it needs right away.
Yeah, a lot of artists do that. I know artists that do that, like Vincent Desiderio, who I learned from when I was at the academy. He would do these huge, I mean, like, I think his biggest one, I don't know, must have been like 30 feet or something. I mean, it was gigantic,
Wow.
And the figures are life size, all these people laying down on a bed. And he did it by literally tacking it up on a wall like that.
Yep.
And then I think when he was done, he actually sent it to somebody to frame.
Oof.
But I mean, he's he's in the Marlborough Gallery in New York, so you know what I mean. People that are buying his stuff are spending, high end money, right?
Sweet.
So
yeah.
But yeah, that's how he does. In fact, if you can follow him on Instagram, he shows his process, and that's what he does. He just sort of builds his paintings as he goes, working on the canvas, and then when he's done, he gets them framed.
The biggest one I ever made was it's in the book. It's a tribute to Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's 13 feet wide, but in 3 panels. And I determined the size I asked the gallery, like, what's the biggest I can make these paintings? And they're like, well, the size. They measured the elevator that goes up to the gallery, and they were like, it has to be able to fit into the gallery, so it's got to be this big.
Right.
I was like, okay, well, that's going to be the middle panel. That's the biggest panel, and then there's going to be 2 more panels, 1 on each side. So that's how we determined that it would be 4 meters, which is about 13 feet.
So with a lot of your gallery things, how many site-specific pieces do you normally do? Or was that just a special
You mean like
case?
ones that where I had to know the size of the?
Yeah.
I think that's probably the first one.
Okay.
Normally, I work completely sort of oblivious of all that, and
Yeah.
and then it's sort of up to the buyer to decide if it's right for them.
I wanted to ask too, because it's something that I went through. I remember when I was in art school, everybody would say teachers always pushing to work big, work big, work big, work big.
Yeah.
And then I think the biggest one I did was 8 foot, 5 foot by 8 foot. And then you think, okay, you're going to work and it's going to be big, but that I found that it was not being 8 feet. Actually wasn't that big. It wasn't like I was using a house brush.
Yeah, I get that feeling too. Like even with the 13-foot wide one, I was like, it seems so big, and then when you're done, it's like, man, I just want to do one that's the size of the side of a building, like.
Yeah, but I think the biggest, the Vince's was really big, and then I saw there was this great Sergeant World War I painting because they had a World War I show at the Academy, and it was like 21 feet. I mean, it was gigantic, so the figures were almost life size.
Cool.
But the interesting thing about that was that his mark making seemed to have the same delivery and urgency that it did if he was working on a watercolor.
Oh man,
which is not easy to do.
Yeah, that's masterful,
right? So I was wondering if you're working on sometimes these very small pages, and you're getting a certain Cooperness. I will call it a Dave Cooperness to it, right? That I feel like it's like a signature, but then you're trying to get that same signature, but now.
Yeah. Well, I think I definitely try. Like, I'm definitely aware of that when I'm working. How successful I am, I'm not sure, but there's like you just sort of like think in a different way, like instead of doing this, you're like doing this. And it's like you have like an objective in mind, and you know how the rhythm feels. And again, it's like so much trial and error. I'll do it in a certain way, and it's like, oh, fuck, the next day I realized that was all wrong, and I have to kind of do it over. Maybe it's wrong again. Maybe it's wrong the next day too. But events, like at least I have this sort of vision, even though I don't know how I want it to look in the end. I know how it's not okay. Like it has to get somewhere. So I'm always like, basically, my sister asked me once, like, how do you know when your paintings are done? Like, and I'd just be like, when I haven't, there's no more mistakes to fix, basically.
Right.
Because I mean, painting is never done, right? You just decide to stop.
Yeah, exactly. Like I always say the first 10% of a painting is bliss. It's just like, just play. And then the last 10% is cool because you're sort of like wrapping a present. And then in the middle, it's nasty.
Right, because it can go either way. It can like get better, or it can suddenly get
I mean, it just goes up and down, and then your mood goes with it. It's like an emotional roller coaster.
Dave,
have you ever punched a painting?
No.
Have you ever torn up a painting?
But I've yelled at them and thrown brushes and stuff. But painting, no.
Dave, I have maybe a spicy question. Through your career, from what I know, you're a pretty solitary person. You're the only person touching your pages. You're the only person working on your pages. You want a certain amount of control in your work. Have you ever brought in help or got assistance, or maybe even when you're painting, when you're doing like large scale things?
Yeah, never for painting. And I've thought about it too. Like when I was really busy with painting and that's all I was doing.
Yeah.
I toyed with the idea of like, well, maybe I get, somebody to just fill in areas. And I just never went through with it. I always figured it would end up being like almost as much time training them how to do, and basically like that. Even though it's torture for me, those middle stages, it's really kind of essential. Like
Right.
that's how my paintings have this like life to them. Like if there's something going on there, it's because of all the tumultuous ups and downs, you know. Like often an area of my painting will look especially interesting because there's been all that
Right.
stuff going on, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool that you answered it in that way. I had the idea that this question gets posed a lot to different artists that I'll ask it to, and usually it comes down to I'd rather do it myself because spending the time to kind of bring this person in and then get them to do exactly it the way I needed it. You could have just done it yourself.
Yeah. Every artist who has an assistant, you have to go through that period of like trying to get that person to do as close to you
right
as they can. And by the time they're really good, they're good enough to go to get their own work.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's
I went through a lot of that with the television stuff, like making notes on people's work and like, saying like, try doing it this way, or like, here's how I do it. And it was a little over the top. Like sometimes I look back on that stuff and it's, I was probably torturing those guys, like noting. And I didn't have a lot of experience in animation, so I didn't know that was probably kind of a dick move to like expect them to mimic me perfectly. But it paid off in the like for me and for the show. I don't know if it like killed some of those guys.
Well, I think it's all in how you do it. I mean, if you're a dick and you do it to people and you piss them off, like you step on their toes, that's one thing. But part of being a showrunner is getting people. You're the lion tamer, and you've got to get the lion to jump through the hoop of fire where you want them to jump.
I like to think that I was, kind and polite and all that stuff. So hopefully. Anyway, but Jamar, I have actually, just to be clear, I have used assistants to like help me with digital coloring.
Sure.
Like that sort of blocking in stage. There have been a few times over the years that I've hired people to help me with that, which is always really great. Because that blocking in stage is very tedious.
And I think there's maybe two camps here. There's one camp that goes, oh, well, wait a minute. That's not official Dave Cooper because somebody else has touched it. And then there's other people who are like, well, of course you need help.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like I my feeling is that if it, well, especially for the blocking in, like there's no doubt that my final stage is really what, sort of determines the colors and all that. So.
And I was going to ask another question about that. Well, before I go any further, Dave, how you feeling?
Good.
I have to check in on the guests just to make sure you're not like crossing your legs or anything.
Oh man, I'm good. I wish I brought the bottle of gin over here though.
I was going to say that that artist Vincent Desiderio, he has assistants. Guys like Gerhard Richter had assistants that would make up his paint for him and would help him stretch things. And
that's all right. I don't mind that.
Yeah. And then a lot of the old masters had guys that go like, you go do the toes and you do this and call me when it's time to do the face.
We saw. We went to, when we were in Paris. We went to see a room in the Louvre that had about 30 Rubens paintings, and I was like a huge Rubens fan at the time. And we started looking at these paintings, and I was like, "Wow, that hand is really bad." Or check out that foot. It's like you start to realize, oh yeah, this guy couldn't have painted all these paintings. There's no way, they're gigantic.
Right.
A lot of like, pretty shoddy work in some of those.
Yeah. But I mean, again, that's the one thing about painting is that it really is personal in a way, I think, in a more layered way than comics, because comics is, it's pretty simple. It's you pencil, pen, ink, you're not dealing with color until later. It's much more of a, like, I always think of it as like baking brownies. It's like a very specific recipe,
Interesting.
at least in the technical way of
Right.
producing, where painting is like you said, some painters embrace chaos, embrace the part of the process that's not sure. Other painters have everything completely mapped out. And I don't think that you can successfully do a lot of comic work if you don't know, like just leave it to chaos and like, oh, I just spilled ink all over this thing, or
Yeah.
I did this crazy technique. Now it's I can't scan it.
Yeah, I used to call comics the accounting of the art world. Like you have to be, you don't have to, but generally speaking, it helps to be pretty, together and, understand. You got to understand lettering and printing, and you got to rule off all the pages and, composition and inking. It's like there's so much to keep track of with comics.
Yeah, because like a painting, you could just say, this is a triptych, but I'm not satisfied. I need to add another
tick.
I want to add another thing here, or some artists, I want to cut it down.
Yeah.
I don't like this. I can just cut this whole piece off, and you can't really do that in a comic. You can't say, well, all the pages are 8.5 by 11, except this one, which is crooked.
Dave, I had a couple questions, less about the art and more about kind of like maybe your fearlessness as a cartoonist. It's obvious one of your influences is Crumb, and I'm a big underground guy too. I'm a big Crumb, Jim Woodring, Joe Matt. I love people who can tell stories and not wince at themselves. And I wonder if you've ever gone through a period of self-editing or self-censorship. Like, has there been stuff that you go, I don't know if I can draw that?
Never.
That might be too much. Can you talk about what's that component that you don't have?
Well, I was going to say until recently.
Oh, okay.
For some reason, now that my kids are getting older, it's like I'm becoming more aware that they're going to read my stuff eventually. I don't know, it's like a weird switch that's happened. And I'm hoping that it doesn't actually cause me to censor myself, but it is like something that I'm thinking about for the first time.
Wow.
But in the past, no, I was like, I loved the idea of thumbing my nose at all that stuff. If it was super shocking, that was a great thing to me. I didn't want to do it just for that purpose, but I did love the idea that it would upset someone, or be more than someone was expecting or whatever.
So do you think because you have kids, you're afraid of how people might react to them, not to you?
I don't think so. I don't understand it, because it's like my kids are so open. They know that I do weird shit. They're great kids, great people. They're getting older now. They're like, my son's 18 years old. He's almost an adult, and they're very, very accepting of me. But for some reason, I like, maybe it's that I'm like, it's hard to say. I recently got a new patron who wants to commission like super over the top pornographic paintings. And when he first approached me, I was like, wow, this is like the dream. I've always dreamt of this kind of guy, so I can take these weird doodles that I would never execute paintings, and I can finally make them paintings. And so I sit down to start drawing stuff for him, and it just doesn't feel right somehow. Like it's almost like those images live in a certain place, like they are pencil drawings that you kind of keep off to the side. So maybe some people see them once in a while, but the idea of elevating them to the point of, you know, an oil painting that's going to hang on a wall or in a gallery for some reason didn't quite feel right.
Huh. I was, you know what, I was thinking while you were talking, I thought, well, maybe it was coming from a place of is it weird because this guy is asking for it? But if it just came out of your own,
Yeah, no, definitely wasn't that. It was,
yeah,
and it's weird because, like, you know, pornographic fine art is something I think is so cool. So
mhm.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it might actually be that I just haven't found the right personality for those pieces yet. Like they're a little aggressive or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, pornography is also a sliding scale, right? Because, you know, sometimes just a new figure, for some people, that's
Yeah,
over the top. And then there's like penetration, right?
Yeah.
Which for some people is not pornography until it's like, till it's at that
until it's
stage,
there, right?
Yeah,
right?
no, the stuff I'm talking about is pretty over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, again, I'm just pushing myself because it's so fun to like
Mm-hmm.
completely push and be outrageous. But yeah, I don't know.
That's
I'll just have
interesting.
to find the right sort of like
Yeah.
rhythm and mood for it.
Have you had experiences, and I'm not really hung up on how other people kind of view your work because you have your fan base, but say if when you've been at like a gallery show, and I'm sure there's people that have showed up at one of your gallery openings who have no idea what they're about to step into. Have you had very odd conversations with people, or are people bold enough to like
It's pretty
get
rare.
get in your face over things?
It's actually so rare. I can't think of an instance where someone was like upset or anything like that.
Right. And you know, and I don't feel like that's how not how your work translates anyway.
Yeah, I feel like for some reason, like I think that my work has a sort of playfulness and
Yeah.
Mhm.
maybe like kindness to it,
Right.
even when it's raunchy.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that I'm quite proud of, is that people, even people who don't know my work, when they're faced with it at a gallery show or something, they seem to somehow they seem to get that, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, we had a lot of really friendly, interesting conversations out of people.
Hmm. Yeah, that's you know one thing that I love about your work is very uninhibited, and also it's accessible, if that makes sense. And I hope that's not a slur to you. I think it's really fantastic to be able to kind of walk this
Well,
edge
and,
or
people are
fence.
gonna
Yeah.
bring their own hangups to it, no matter what you were doing, no matter
Sure.
what
Yeah.
you could paint baby Jesus or the lamb, and then there are people who are going to walk in and go, you know, come up with the weirdest ideas, you know, about
Well,
that have
actually,
nothing to do with what you were thinking.
that actually did happen to me. Now that I'm thinking about it, one time in San Francisco, I was giving a talk at the Cartoon Art Museum, I think,
Yeah. Hmm.
and there was this woman in the audience that was obviously like super worked up and angry, and like she came there to like call me out,
Oh wow.
but she didn't seem to be, you know, quite all there. So it was almost like sort of sad in a way.
Mhm.
She didn't seem to really know what she was talking about. So it was upsetting, but I wasn't like hurt by
Mhm.
it or anything, because
Right.
I don't think
And,
she understood me.
and you know, and don't get me wrong. Rethinking what I asked you, I wasn't really looking for confrontation stories, but more about like, is there a moment where people have, or like working out your work in front of their own eyes? You know what I mean? It's like I
Right.
thought this was something else, but now I'm looking at it and yo, I'm feeling this. You know what I'm saying? Kind of you like
That's cool. Yeah.
when people over in the space.
I can't think of any specific examples of that.
Sure.
You know, often at openings, I'm pretty nervous and
Mm.
sort of just like dealing with, you know, getting through it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's just I usually have such a warm, sort of positive experience at those things. You know, they seem people seem to really dig it.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is something that I going back to art school and going all the way through and getting my master's, and they spend an awful lot of time in the master's program, with artist statements, and you got to write all this stuff, what everything means, which I never liked, because I think, why do I have to tell you what it means? You should be able to figure out what it means. And if I agree with that, great. If not, it doesn't really matter. But I know galleries love you to write,
Yeah.
I'm Dave Cooper, I blah, 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 blah. So do you have any theories of, because I'm sure that was a different experience than just painting it because you
Oh yeah.
wanted to.
I mean,
And
for the first 20 years or so, I would just be like, yeah, I don't really do that kind of thing. Like,
You're not an artist statement guy, right?
yeah, I'll give you my bio, and they'd be like, oh, okay. You'd be like vaguely sort of disappointed. And I still kind of avoid it, but I've gotten to the point where I see the value in it. Like a really well written artist statement that has true insight is can be pretty cool if it can sort of give you insight into the person's work that isn't evident right away with the image, But I don't think that I'd love to be able to get to that point. I've started writing about my work a little bit more, but it's still kind of awkward for me. I'm not the most. I think I don't enjoy writing, I guess. I usually enjoy it when it's done, and I'm like, that was pretty good. But the whole process of actually writing, I'd much rather be doing something else.
I have a couple of side questions, Dave, and then we're going to start wrapping up. As I like to say on the show, where's the time going? We've been talking for a while now. I hope you've enjoyed this. Some of your dalliances into superhero work, talking about going back to comics. How did you have a space for that? And I'm specifically talking about, like, one of my favorite things of yours was, I think it was in that Bizarro Comics collection. There was like an anthology. I think you did a Wonder Woman story in there, and I thought that was so fresh. Do you have a space in your head for superhero work, or are you kind of like finding a place to like poke fun at it? Where are you coming from?
That was really just sort of like something that I did because it seemed strange that I would be asked to do that. So like,
right.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll do that.
Yeah.
It was almost like the fact that it didn't make sense that made me want to do it. But yeah, I'm not like really. I don't have a ton of fondness for superhero comics or anything like that. I've always had a funny feeling that I should do an Incredible Hulk and Fantastic Four comic in my style, and I've approached a couple writers about it, but it never sort of takes off. I think it's just one of those things that sounds funny to me, but doesn't really need to exist.
Yeah, because I think about, and Mike and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, about kind of like my early junction into coming into comics. There was a really, really giant chasm between indie and mainstream cartoonists, and I wondered if people would assume that you have some sort of hatred for superhero stuff because you're an indie guy, quote unquote, and I don't necessarily believe those things are true anymore.
It's not. It's a sort of an indifference, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not. It's not something that grabs me. But I love good artwork. So like, there's tons of cool comic book artists that I really like.
We had said one of our guests I think a year ago said this really interesting thing, because there's so many new waves of cartoonists who didn't grow up reading mainstream comic books.
Yeah.
That
or our mainstream comic.
Or you're right.
Yeah.
To say something like, and this is kind of a spicy comment, that if Stan Lee never existed or Jack Kirby never existed, it doesn't change their lives because they weren't influenced by that stuff at all. So I wonder how you feel about statements like that. Is that
I mean, I feel like, even I am probably influenced by Kirby, even though I didn't spend a lot of time looking at his work. It's sort of like infused the entire, atmosphere.
He's like the Big Bang, it's just like he's
Mhm.
background radiation, in a way. Just like Mobius, there's like
Yeah.
certain artists that you could say, well, I don't necessarily want to draw I don't want to draw Peanuts, but I was definitely influenced by
Yeah.
Peanuts because the world I was interested in was influenced by Peanuts, and I think that as you mature, as you get older, you realize it's like, at least I should say for me, it's like I can look at somebody's work and admire it, but not want to do it.
Right.
And I don't feel like that I
that's
have to lessen that person because I don't want to do it. That doesn't mean that they're crap.
Right.
That's a great realization to make. Like when you reach that point and you realize, like, I can love this thing and I don't have to make it. Like, I don't have to be that thing. I can just like that, or I dislike that, and that doesn't affect me.
I also wanted to ask you. We're talking about iconography in a way when you're talking about people like Mobius or Kirby, and you have this sort of signature Dave Cooper things like floating characters with like big heads and shrunken bodies, and I was wondering if that's something that you always did as a kid and that sort of like carried through, or was that like...
No, I think that went along with all that other stuff when I was discovering my contemporaries like Klaus and Chris Ware, and yeah, it just seemed like, and Mark Ryden too. Like that was all new stuff to me, so I adopted some of that stuff, but it wasn't like, for someone like Mark Ryden, it's this sort of like old love of keen girls and toys and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's like something totally fresh, and I take little bits from all these different artists that I like.
Yeah, because I think that that's one of the things that comics has, maybe even over painting, especially representational painting, is you can draw something in a comic where you could have, I don't know, you could have Prince Valiant having a conversation with Snoopy, and it will work. You can't do it in painting, right? You cannot have that one sort of dogmatic approach to drawing, but because you would see that in Mad Magazine, where
Right.
they would do on those parodies, where especially like Bill Elder and people like that would collide completely different.
Because it's like the line unifies things,
Right.
The fact that it's all drawn with ink.
Right, and you believe it because you can believe a drawing of, I don't know, Barbie riding a dinosaur as a drawing, and if you look at it as a painting, it starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
And there's something about a line drawing that's like a magical spell that allows you to combine things that are ironic and could not possibly be combined in any other medium. And I was wondering if you were ever influenced by like Mad Magazine or things like that, Jack Davis and people like that. I sort of always felt like there was Jack Davis had that kind of crumbly line. He was a fantastic.
To me, Jack Davis was like completely from another planet. Like when I was a kid, I would look at people like that, and it didn't seem like anything I could ever imagine doing. His technique is so insane. It's like I've realized just recently, like a lot of the artists that I liked back in like my childhood, it was something about the volume, the way that they drew, it almost felt like 3D, and it was like magic to me, like to imagine that I could actually pull something like that off one day was, impossible for me when I was a kid. Same with Von Bode. Like when I look at his stuff now, I realize it was like, as a kid, it was just like looking at a magic trick. There was no understanding how you could, like, I could copy it and it just would never look right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his drawings were like fucking 3D images.
Yeah, we had Mark on. I think it was last year, Mike.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic family. Before we kick out, Dave, I would like to maybe ask you some questions about your filmmaking, because I know, like you said, you have a lot of fingers in pies. So maybe talk about, as I remember that you were developing a couple of films. I know there's an Eddie Table film, and then I think you were doing a live action thing also.
Yeah, the live action thing is done.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually completed about 1 week before the pandemic hit.
Wow.
Yeah, I had just finished like going back and forth from Ottawa to Toronto to spend time with the editor, putting it together. And then when the pandemic hit, we decided to sit on it until the festival season or festivals started, behaving in a way that we were used to.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hoping to get it out soon. I'm happy with it. It was a bizarre experience, creating a short film with human beings.
Yeah, right.
And like real-time collaborators too. Like in animation, you've got hundreds of people that are collaborating with you, but it's sort of in a snail's pace kind of way, in live action, it's so exciting to have, like, I think we had a crew of maybe 15 people, 2 days, and you just have to make everything happen. There's a schedule and you got to get all the shots, and everybody's super stoked and like just willing to give whatever it takes. It was really, really interesting and fun.
And
if
go
this
ahead,
works
Mike.
out, if this works out, do you think you would like to do more of that?
Yeah, definitely. The thing, like, whenever I do something in some new discipline, it's always sort of an experiment, like where I imagined for years that I would like doing it, and then when I get a chance to try it, it's like, okay, here's where I find out if I actually like doing it. When I finished the short, it was like, yeah, I can totally do this, and it all seemed much more attainable to me too. Like, having done it, I felt like I really understood the process, and I started watching movies in a different way, like sort of feeling like a fly on the wall, during production and stuff like that.
There's a question, Dave. Our buddy D Brad said, Dave, did you storyboard did you board for your live action film?
I did, but in a very half-assed kind of way.
Okay.
Because I had the film in my mind, and I had this sort of novice idea that, like, I can just tell everybody how to do it. And the night before, my producer's like, so are you going to bring the storyboards to this? And I'm like, I haven't really done any. Like, I'm just going to, tell everybody how to do it. And she's like, you got to do some storyboards. So I basically just whipped something out. It's probably only like 5 or 6 pages, but it's invaluable, right? I just didn't understand at the time that you got to have everything kind of locked down and blocked out and all that.
Right. I guess you can't really shrug your way through filming, right?
Especially for continuity, because
right.
You have to have your order of your shots, and you need to help the DP has to know, like, well, what do you want me to shoot? How am I supposed to frame this?
All a learning experience for me.
Yeah. Well, I guess probably working in animation helped you with that, right?
Yeah, I think it did, and comics too. I mean, they all sort of play off of each other, but there's certainly some skills that are specific to each discipline. And film, like live action, is the area where I have the most to learn, for sure.
I wanted to ask about a little bit of your director's eye when you're doing your illustrations, or even studies for your paintings, because I know this. I forget the name of the series, Dave, that you just did with the airline.
Julia.
Yeah, with the airlines
Julia Airlines.
flight attendants. Yeah, it's fantastic stuff. Where there's kind of like a lot of forced perspective, and
Yeah, I started doing a lot of that. I never really thought much about perspective in the past. I would just sort of like flub it and fake it, and
Mhm.
it would I would if it didn't work out quite right, I would sort of embrace it and like try to imagine that's charming, that it's not perfect and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was when I started doing the TV show, I was
Mm.
doing a lot of backgrounds that would have to sort of um, work over a long period in many different ways, and I didn't do it like very professionally, like it should have been done. But I
Mm.
definitely developed a style during that time of
Mm.
like kind of a fisheye
Right.
feel, like just a slightly fisheye and sort of wavy
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, vanishing points and stuff like that.
Yeah. I guess almost to maybe mimic the idea that you're inside an airplane, or like you're
Yeah, it
inside a
worked for those
tube.
paintings. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, so after the series, I started sort of applying it to some of my paintings, and it felt like a new toy to me. I could give my paintings this greater sort of scope.
Mm.
Well, I
Uh,
always say that perspective is one of the things I think that is really personal, because you can look at a Ditko, part of a Ditko panel, and you can tell it's him just by the perspective, or Gene Colan, or Mobius, or
Yeah,
Kirby. I mean, there's just a way, or Crumb. There's a way that they bend space in their
yeah, for
when they
sure.
draw something that's
mhm.
really personal. And I know a lot of that's a difficult step for a lot of artists to go through, is learning perspective. But you're doing what I always talk about, is that once you learn it, then it becomes like a very personal way to, like color.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a very strong tool, that I think a lot of people don't really think about.
Yeah, I think like I mean I understood perspective from a very young age. I remember my dad showing me on a sketch pad when I was really little. He drew like a car in 3-point perspective. So I sort of understood it, but I never felt like applying it in a serious way. And over the last few years, it's just become this really fun thing that I can toy with. And it's just interesting that I think in the past, I always wanted my scenes and my paintings and comic panels to sort of feel claustrophobic.
Hmm.
And lately, it's just fun to imagine that I can sort of, look out over the horizon and stuff. It's
Um,
cool. Like 3-point perspective in particular, I just find so fascinating.
yeah, that what you just said about a little bit of the claustrophobia reminds me of some of those early covers you were doing. There was a lot of kitchens.
Yeah.
There was a lot of kitchens and
And they're
washing
starting to come
machines.
back into my work too. That's a
uh,
thing for me for sure.
no, that's fantastic. Um, and another thing that I love about your progress, I guess I could say, Dave, is that you're always kind of taking one thing from the last thing and applying it to the
Right.
next thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's something I really, really dig about my career. That's I'm always trying to keep that balanced. So I've got like when I'm the happiest I'm that I ever can be is when I've got like my drawing is feeling good, my painting's feeling good. I'm like drumming, to a level that I love, and it's just like bliss. But it's so rare, it's usually that one thing is kind of overtaking everything else, and everything else has to sort of like take a break, and you get rusty.
I have a million questions. I'm glad I'm kind of getting them all out here. I have a
Yeah, cut you
question.
off just then, Jamar.
Oh, no, 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 no! You totally answered that. I have a question about kind of, if you could, and maybe this is kind of tough to kind of stand outside your own window and look in. the Dave Cooper fan. Like, do you have? I'm sure you have people who have just followed everything you do, or they buy everything you do, or they're trying to figure out a way to get on your commission list for painting. Or there's some people who are like, "Hey, when are you going to do comics again?"
Yeah, I used to get that a lot.
You know what I mean? How is that like in 2021? Are people just like, okay, well, you're painting now, I guess I'll just sit on my hands, or do you, do you?
Yeah, basically, like I'm noticing, like I'm really active on Instagram, and it's interesting how like I'm getting all these people interested in my work who know nothing about what I've done in the past. It's kind of exciting to me that they,
Mhm.
people can look at what I'm doing right now. They don't know anything about my comics or animation or whatever, and they connect with it just on that sort of immediate level.
Mhm.
But my fans are like they're just the best. They're so they're always so kind and sensitive and polite. It's really wild.
Yeah. So, and I guess just like you said, the Instagram influence, or just people who have fresh eyes to the work. Do you see people kind of doing deep dives and going back and like, oh, I went on Amazon and got all this stuff that you've
Rarely,
done?
yeah. It's kind of rare. It's like the old fans still contact me on Instagram, but most of the new ones, they're quite happy with just like letting me know that they like this image or whatever. I don't feel like they're going and searching into the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's something that's really big with the younger generation. I don't think they need to
Right.
go and mine all kinds of stuff.
yeah. I think the artists, the serious artists, they like to, they want to have they still want to have their hard copy.
Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of people who are just general fans, they just click, they save it.
Well, it's a lot of fellow artists though too. So I don't know what's up. I think it might be just the younger kids are not. I don't know what it is. Maybe they have so much cool shit in that phone, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, everything basically you can think about, just about you can get it in
But
your
I
phone.
do notice like some of the younger kids. It's kind of funny how they really don't know a lot about the past. To put it boldly, like I remember one time I posted a drawing with hat, like lions hatch,
Mhm.
and somebody was like, "That is so cool. What's with all the stripes?"
Wow.
Stripes.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be a striped car. Yeah, it's just little comments like that kind of it puts things in perspective.
Right. Like why is there ants on the ground? No, I'm just making noise. Like you're
Yeah,
populating this with just
right,
marks.
right. Well, you do get with the younger people, and I talked about this before, even with people who read comic strips, but you think like everyone should be able to read a comic strip, right? There's the word
Yeah,
balloon or the thought bubbles, and then but you get a lot of people who don't know how to read things either in sequence or in
wow.
the case of the stuff that I do, which is a continuity strip. They don't realize that 7 strips might be 5 minutes in the strip time. They think like, wow, those people were standing in the park for 7 days talking
Wow.
about. So there is a certain weird disconnect in the
Yeah,
fact that young people can come into it because Instagram is just like a flood
Yeah.
every day, hundreds of thousands of millions of images just, and you sort of like, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. But you don't really necessarily think about it more than I like that. And then
totally.
if
Mm.
when you start to think about I like that, then you go like, well, I never really looked at anything like this before, because maybe they're teaching, as I often talk about. Um, I've gone through waves of people who like knew who Kelvin and Hobbes were, like what you were talking about earlier, and
Yeah,
now there's kids who don't know who Kelvin and Hobbes are
yeah,
because they're that generation of parents who would take them to the bookstore and buy them their copy of Calvin Hobbes
Right.
have aged out. Those kids are older now. So maybe when they have kids, they might go, "Oh, here's this thing that I remember." But I see a lot of that sort of like churn in the fact that you're getting a whole new group of people to see your work on Instagram that would
Yeah.
not see it otherwise.
Totally. I
Right.
mean, guys like us spend so much time basically researching.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't feel like research when you're doing it because it's just like I'm so passionate about comics. I want to know how George Harriman did this or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's a thing that maybe some kids today don't go through. Where they spend years and years just digging and finding out how things happened, and
Well, I think
so they they think that crosshatch is a striped car.
right. Well, it's also because I think the biggest thing about the modern world is that images are not precious.
Mhm.
When I was 15, images were more precious because there weren't as many images by artists that I liked, right?
Yeah.
Now there's like so many artists and there's so many images that each image, even if you like it, it's still not quite as precious as it used to be,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know?
Disposable.
Yeah. And so I guess, there's that good and bad side, but I think it's awesome that you get people exposed to your work through Instagram that probably would not see it otherwise because how would
Absolutely. Yeah.
they,
I mean, I often wonder what happens to an artist when all their fans die. Like, you just time
you
for
turn
you to
into a
die
ghost.
too.
Right, right. You turn into a ghost, right?
But I guess the challenge is to somehow, continue offering stuff that people find interesting.
And I think this will be a great place to end, but I'm going to end on a great question from our best bud, Suzanne Waringo. Suze is a fantastic human being, and she asks of us, what role do you feel artists have in society? It's a nice, lofty question for you, Dave.
Yeah, that's a big one. I always say that, like, my only responsibility is to myself and to like express what's inside. So people can take that and do with it what they want and interpret it how they want. But I think it's our responsibility to just be as honest as possible and just like mine as deeply as we can, and whatever it is that you're passionate about, just try to get as deep as you can with it.
Oh, I like that. That's
Yeah.
a great answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Did you want to touch that real quick?
No, I basically I agree with Dave. I mean, I think you maybe you owe it to yourself to be as honest as you can be, but the fact is that we don't even the most popular artists don't control how other people react to it. Once something is out there, they're going to do with it what they want. They're going to read into it what they want. They're going to think it's great, or they're going to think you're evil, and things are so politically charged. But I think, somebody can not like something in, 2021, and then in 2050, people are going to think this is the best thing I have ever seen
Right.
in my entire life. It will have been rediscovered to be like some eternal truth, but you have no control over that, right?
I like the idea of people liking my work and getting something out of it, but for me, my art has always been like therapy to me. Like, it's not that I want to achieve something, it's that I'm trying to make myself feel better or more capable or whatever it is. Like, from an early age, it was always that when I drew, I felt less small or foolish or whatever it was. And then as an adult, I'm kind of the same way. Like, if I don't do, like when I was doing the series, the TV series, one of the big drawbacks to that was that I wasn't mining that sort of darker stuff. Like I was drawing constantly, but it was a certain frequency of my of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So it started to make me crazy. And by the time it was over, I was just like so thirsty to get back into that stuff. And it just fills me up. It makes me feel better, you know?
Yeah, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I was trying to wrap this up, but that's a great insight. So, did you feel like you were kind of like shutting off a part of yourself to do, I don't want to say kid stuff, but there's like, you know,
It was just
a dial you had to turn, right?
it was just a responsibility. Like I made this promise that I would do this thing, and it just, there was no time. Like it didn't allow for any free time to do my own thing. So it was like in the beginning, it just seemed like a logical equation, and then over time, it started to like become more evident that there's like that's an important thing for me, that I have to express certain, you know, a certain part of me.
Because you maybe had never had to channel yourself off in that way before, right?
Yeah, no, I never did.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's the other thing about it. As you go along, I think as an artist, you know, you discover things about yourself when you're 15, and then other things when you're 20, and then some stuff when you're 50, and you hopefully that continues to evolve. And then I think also maybe it's a little different in the fact that you were kind of always working for yourself.
Yeah,
Your career is working for yourself. Now you're working for yourself, but you're really working in a partnership with other people who have a certain expectation. Where I was working for other people and still do other work for other people, but then I decided that I also needed to start doing more work for myself. And I actually feel that that's more that work is more important to me now in the past 10 years. Not that I still don't derive some pleasure or satisfaction from doing the commercial work just beyond the paycheck, but I think, you know, it's different to come at these ideas or solutions or ways of thinking about your work from different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I was doing that show, it was like I knew they didn't want, you know, like 100% Dave,
Right.
Because that's what Weasel Comics is, and that's what my paintings are. They wanted like a certain thing that I do, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's like, you know, everybody understands the arrangement. It's just a matter of like how long can you maintain that.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that is what I observed was really the difference between what I would say was a fine art person, right, and a commercial art person, because a commercial art person has the ability or maybe the desire to satisfy themselves in that particular venue. And some people can't, right? They cannot
Yeah, totally.
put themselves, and it's not a bad thing. It's just like that's not their personality. Like
It's just totally different. Yeah, it's different personalities. Like I would run into people in the TV industry who were 100% satisfied, you know, doing exactly what they do. And it's just like, that's amazing. Like, you know, everybody's got a different way of doing stuff.
Yeah.
I just have this, I have like all these other things that I like to do too, you know?
Yeah, I love it. All right, Dave, I'm going to let you go. This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, like it's great talking to you guys.
Yeah, I hope the time just melted away in a good way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's been 2 hours?
7 hours. Yeah, look at the time.
7 hours. That's right. Yeah. You know,
no, it was really good talking to you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Dave, I've been putting a plug in for your website while we've been doing the podcast, but do you have any other place, or maybe a plug for your Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram's where I'm the most active. That's at Dave Cooper 67. And then the only other thing I want to plug is that book you held up earlier.
Can I do the honors for you?
Yeah. I'm just very, very proud and excited about that book. It came out like right around the same time as the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I never got a chance to promote it. Like we had signings lined up all over the country and stuff, and they all got canceled. So I would love for you to all try it out, give it a shot.
Yeah, and I have to get mine signed from you at some point. Yeah, I was chasing you down a while ago. I was like, so yeah, what's up with that Paris show? And you're like, I don't know, it's coming.
Yeah, it's awful, man. I've been just delaying and delaying and delaying with that thing.
Mm-hmm.
The work's coming along, and the pandemic is just making things a little complicated because I don't want to have the show unless I can actually attend. You know, I
Right,
want to be
right.
there.
Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well-
And you don't want to be like 3 people come to your show.
Well, please let us know when everything is set up and ready to roll. We'll definitely signal boost. And I need a reason to go to France. So
Yeah, that would be fun.
I appreciate that. All right, Dave, we're going to let you go pee. Thank you so much. Some notes on our
Yeah.
way out. And Dave, hang out for we could do our exit. Just to let you guys know, in observance of Thanksgiving, we're going to be off next Wednesday.
American Thanksgiving.
American Thanksgiving. That's right.
We've already had ours.
Yeah.
But we'll be back on the 1st of December with Ray Anthony Hype Part 2. We had a great time talking to him earlier in the month. He's going to come back to wrap up. So I'm very excited. So for Mike, Dave, and myself, you guys have a great holiday. And you ready, Dave? This is what we do. Let's sign off. And
What do we do?
yeah, go ahead.
Wash your Kirby hands.
Let's get some Kirby hands.
Oh, there you go.
Ooh, that's a good one right there. There you go. Great, guys. Thanks so much. We'll see you
Thanks.
next time. Bye-bye.